In November of 1519, a Spanish soldier with fewer than 500 men walked into the capital of an empire of 6 million people and was welcomed with gifts. 2 years later, that same empire was gone. Its capital city was rubble. Its emperor was dead. Then another emperor was dead. Then a third emperor was executed in the jungle. The most powerful civilization in the Americas, a city larger than most of Europe, fell not just to swords and cannons, but to disease, betrayal, prophecy, and a series of decisions that, looking back, seem almost impossible to believe. This is the story of how the Aztec Empire fell, and it did not happen the way most people think. Long before Cortés ever set foot in Mexico, the Aztecs had built something extraordinary. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, sat on islands in the middle of Lake Texcoco, connected to the mainland by causeways that could be raised or cut at will. By the early 16th century, the Aztecs had come to rule over up to 500 small states and some 5 to 6 million people, either by conquest or commerce. Tenochtitlan itself had more than 140,000 inhabitants and was the most densely populated city ever to exist in Mesoamerica. Its markets moved tens of thousands of people on a single trading day. It had aqueducts, floating gardens, towering temples, and a level of urban planning that stunned the first Europeans who saw it. This was not a primitive society waiting to be discovered. It was one of the great cities of the world, and almost nobody in Europe knew it existed. The Aztec Empire wasn't a single unified nation. It was an alliance of 3 city-states ruling over hundreds of conquered territories through tribute and intimidation. The Aztecs ruled hegemonically through local rulers, their power resting on the perception of unchallengeable Aztec military supremacy, an inherently unstable system vulnerable to a loss of prestige under even moderate challenges. Conquered peoples paid tribute in goods, labor, and, critically, in people, handed over for ritual sacrifice. Moctezuma II showed little mercy when enforcing his laws, exterminating entire adult populations in communities that defied him. This created an empire of enemies hiding in plain sight, tribes who smiled and paid tribute while waiting, patiently, for any opportunity for revenge. Nobody yet knew that opportunity was sailing across the Atlantic. Hernán Cortés was not sent to conquer an empire. He set sail from Cuba on February 18, 1519, with about 500 soldiers, 100 sailors, and 11 ships, a force laughably small for what he was about to attempt. He defied his own governor's orders to do it. He wasn't a brilliant strategist by training. He was ambitious, ruthless, and willing to gamble everything on the idea that whatever he found on the mainland would be worth the risk. He had no idea he was about to encounter a civilization of millions. He just knew the local rumors mentioned gold. That alone was enough to make him sail. Shortly after landing, Cortés was given a gift that would prove more valuable than any weapon in his arsenal. A young enslaved woman named Malinali, later baptized Marina and remembered as La Malinche. She spoke both Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, and a Mayan dialect one of Cortés's own men understood. As a result, she was instrumental as an interpreter for Cortés and stayed by his side throughout his conquests. Without her, Cortés could not have negotiated, manipulated, or understood a single conversation with the empire he was about to dismantle. History rarely remembers her as anything more than a footnote. In reality, she may have been the single most important figure in the entire conquest, translating not just words, but the entire political fabric of a civilization Cortés didn't understand at all. Word of strange ships and pale strangers reached Moctezuma II long before Cortés ever arrived at his capital. And Moctezuma did something that would define the rest of the story. He hesitated. Although wary of Cortés, Montezuma sent emissaries with lavish gifts to the Spanish in a cautious game of diplomacy. He didn't attack. He didn't ignore them. He tried to buy them off, hoping gifts of gold would satisfy them and send them home. Instead, the gold did the opposite. The gifts alerted Cortés to the abundance of gold and silver in the land, and he became determined to seize it all. Moctezuma's caution, meant to protect his empire, became the very thing that doomed it. As Cortés marched inland, he stumbled onto something far more valuable than gold: resentment. He allied with the neighboring city of Zempoala, convincing them to rise against their Aztec rulers, then continued toward Tlaxcala, a nation that had resisted Aztec domination for generations. The Tlaxcalans in particular were critical to Cortés's future successes, as they were old rivals of the Aztecs and boasted a sizable army that supplemented the modest force of conquistadores. Cortés didn't conquer the Aztec Empire with 500 Spaniards. He conquered it by becoming the figurehead of a rebellion that had been waiting decades for a chance to strike back. In October of 1519, Cortés arrived at the city of Cholula and learned, through Malinche, of a plot to ambush his forces. In response, Cortés unleashed a massacre on the city, setting it ablaze. Reportedly, Cortés and his men killed 3,000 people in just 3 hours. Whether the plot was real or exaggerated remains debated by historians to this day. What's certain is the message it sent across the empire. Resistance meant annihilation. By the time Cortés resumed his march toward Tenochtitlan, fear was traveling faster than his army. On November 8, 1519, after the fall of Cholula, Cortés and his forces entered Tenochtitlan, a city historians believe may have been larger than every city in Europe except Naples or Constantinople. Moctezuma greeted him not with arrows, but with welcome. For centuries, the popular story claimed Moctezuma believed Cortés was the returning god, Quetzalcoatl. This is now believed to have been a myth of the conquerors, and perhaps of natives who wished to rationalize the actions of the Aztec Tlatoani. The more unsettling truth may be simpler. Moctezuma understood exactly what kind of threat had arrived, and gambled that diplomacy was safer than war. It was a gamble he would not survive. Within days of entering the city, Cortés made his move. The Spanish took Moctezuma hostage on November 14, 1519, as a safety measure because they were so outnumbered by the Aztec. It was an audacious, almost suicidal gamble. A few hundred foreigners holding the ruler of a 6-million-person empire captive inside his own capital. Cortés assumed he could control the Aztecs through Moctezuma. But Cortés had little knowledge of the ruling system. Moctezuma was not all-powerful as Cortés imagined. The emperor's authority began to bleed away the moment his own people realized he was a prisoner, not a leader. While Cortés was briefly away dealing with rival Spanish forces, he left his lieutenant, Pedro de Alvarado, in command. During a religious festival, Alvarado made a decision that would ignite the war Cortés had been trying to delay. Alvarado led an attack on the Aztec elite, slaughtering noblemen and mostly unarmed warriors present at the event, provoking a direct and definitive war between the Spaniards and Aztecs. Whatever fragile peace had existed inside Tenochtitlan was over. The city turned against the invaders within its walls, and against the emperor who had let them in. Cortés rushed back into a city now in open revolt, and tried to use Moctezuma one last time, ordering him to call for calm from a palace rooftop. The Aztecs, aware that Moctezuma was compromised, ignored him. Moctezuma was stoned to death on that roof by either the Aztecs or the Spanish. No one truly knows. With their hostage dead and the city erupting around them, the Spanish attempted to flee in the dead of night. Tenochtitlan's causeways became death traps. Many Spaniards drowned or were killed that night on June 30, 1520, a disaster the Spanish would later call La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. Cortés had lost the city. He had not lost the war. While Cortés regrouped and rebuilt his alliances outside the city, something was already moving through Tenochtitlan that no army could have introduced deliberately and no defense could have stopped: smallpox. A Franciscan friar traveling with the Spanish recorded what witnesses described inside the city: the dead piling faster than the living could move them, families dying entire in their homes, buildings pulled down over the bodies inside because there was no other way to deal with the scale of it. By 1520, the disease had killed an estimated 40% of Tenochtitlan's population in a single year. It killed Moctezuma's successor, Cuitlahuac, after just 80 days on the throne. It did not distinguish between soldiers and children, between nobles and farmers, between those who had supported the Spanish and those who had fought them. The people defending the city when the siege came were not the same population that had existed a year before. They were a city already in the process of dying, trying to fight a war at the same time. After the Night of Sorrows, the Aztec Empire needed leadership more than it had ever needed it. What it got was a succession crisis compressed into weeks. Cuitlahuac, who replaced Moctezuma, was by most accounts the leader the moment demanded, the one who had organized the uprising that drove the Spanish from the city, the one who had argued from the beginning that the Spanish should never have been let in. He lasted 80 days before smallpox killed him. His successor was 18 years old. Cuauhtémoc inherited an empire that had buried 2 rulers in less than 3 months, a capital depopulated by plague, a treasury depleted by years of tribute and war preparations, and a ring of allied enemies closing in from every direction. He had personally argued against admitting the Spanish into the city. He now had to defend it from the consequences of a decision he had opposed. He fought anyway. In May of 1521, Cortés returned to Tenochtitlan, not as a guest, not as a negotiator, but as a besieger. The strategy was straightforward: cut the city off from the mainland, Destroy the causeways, control the lake, stop the food, stop the water, let the city eat itself. The siege lasted 93 days. The Aztecs who remained, starving, sick, outnumbered, watching their city being dismantled block by block, did not surrender easily. They fought for every building, every street, every temple. Cortés later wrote that the resistance surprised him. It should not have surprised him. They had nowhere to go. The allies who might have helped them had already changed sides. The causeways that once made the city unconquerable now made it a trap. On August 13, 1521, the city fell. Cuauhtémoc attempted to flee by canoe across the lake. He was captured. Cortés, needing to know where any remaining Aztec gold had been hidden, had him tortured. His feet were burned. He reportedly looked at the man conducting the torture and said, "Do you think I am on a bed of roses?" He was held prisoner for years and eventually executed. Hanged from a ceiba tree in the jungle in 1525 during a march to Honduras that Cortés brought him on, partly, it seems, because he didn't trust leaving him behind. Tenochtitlan, one of the largest and most sophisticated cities on Earth, was stripped and demolished. Its temples were pulled apart to build a cathedral. Its stones became foundations. Its canals were filled. Cortés became the ruler of a vast Mexican empire built directly on top of the ruins of the one he had just destroyed. What this story resists is any single explanation. Cortés did not conquer the Aztec Empire. He became the catalyst for its collapse. A collapse that required the long patience of subjugated peoples, the specific geography of a lake city that could be besieged, the catastrophic timing of a disease that killed roughly 40% of a population in a single year, and a leadership crisis that cost the empire 2 emperors inside 3 months. 500 Spaniards did not bring down a civilization of 6 million. They were the match. The kindling had been stacking up for decades, and the fall of Tenochtitlan was not the end of the story. Armed resistance outside the capital continued for roughly 60 more years. The Spanish would spend the rest of the 16th century fighting wars that most histories don't bother to mention because they happened after the dramatic fall of the city, after what feels like an ending. Tenochtitlan itself never entirely disappeared. Its foundations are still down there. Mexico City, a metropolis of over 20 million people, sits directly above the same lake bed where the empire stood. When construction workers dig in the old city center, they still find the stones. Civilizations don't die in a single battle. They die in stages, through miscalculation, through plague, through the accumulated weight of every enemy they made and never finished off. The Aztec Empire is the clearest possible illustration of that, and if you look at it long enough, it stops being a story about Cortés at all. If this changed how you see the conquest, or history in general, subscribe. Every video we make starts with the same question: what actually happened? And why does the popular version leave so much out? That's the only thing we do here. We'll see you in the next one.